Oh, all right. Well, as long as you promise that that's the case, okay, I'll stick it out.
Stick it out. All right. So yeah, we're in chapter 2, Mishnah 1 of Yoma, and we are picking up really almost exactly where we left off from chapter 1. Chapter 1, you may remember at the very end, talked about the responsibilities of the high priest leading up to the Yom Kippur service, how in usual days he could do it or not do it as he wanted, but right before Yom Kippur, he had to do it in order to get him familiar with this is a cow, this is a sheep, and those kinds of things. Well, that opportunity or requirement, we're now going to move on to the general discussion about other priests. How do you decide which priest gets to do what? Right? It's a temple, and there are lots of Kohanim, but there are only so many jobs. So the beginning of chapter 2 is going to be figuring it out. Is someone here?
Yes, someone just wrote.
I thought that the Kohen Gadol is the in charge of administration, decide who do what.
You might think that there was like some sort of roster, and then there was a division of which families served at which times of the year, so that you didn't have every Kohen in the country showing up at the same time. But on a day-to-day basis, as we're going to see, it wasn't quite like there was a schedule all laid out.
But if these are inherited jobs, it's not like you're picking the best person for the job. Inherited jobs, you might not have the best, which might mean you might have someone else overseeing that it will be done correctly.
Well, let's wait for our other members to come back in, and then we'll look at how they resolve this. And you tell me whether you think it was the best way to decide. That'll be our test. Like, I mean, it's not that long of a walk between that door and this door.
Because in England, you know, the job is inherited king, so now they have a parliament that decides what's going to be done. You don't trust the king and the queen so much.
You know, just trying to adjust it.
And you see, the best intentions go
off. That can't be right. And I'm going to go look at the video again. That's going to really confuse people who are watching at home.
What just happened? That's right.
Yeah, don't worry, it wasn't an earthquake. No earthquakes.
No snowstorms.
Not in California.
Yeah.
Okay. But that was tilted, so it was going to go eventually. I just was trying to untilt it. It was stuck on the cable. We'll see. Where are they?
I wonder if they went. Oh, somebody else is coming in again. Is another person just walked past? So maybe.
Are they walking in or walking out?
Walking toward us. I don't know if they're shopping at the gift shop, but I just saw somebody else.
Most people don't come by the shop this late.
Oh, that's true. Then why do they have it open?
Because they're finishing up afterwards. The ladies who work come during the school time, and they take care of doing stock and other stuff after school is over. So.
Oh, okay.
How much stuff they sell?
They do a good business. Yeah,
nice.
Yeah. It really helps.
Usually I see that it's empty.
No, yeah, because we don't have people constantly in there, but because we have volunteer staff, you know, we couldn't pay someone to sit in there, but we have great volunteers. They turn over most of the merchandise quite well. All right, I'm going to go find out where they are because we need to continue with or without them. Hey, what happened to Michelle?
She's talking, blah, blah, blah.
All right,
we'll start.
Okay, so Mishnah 1 from chapter 2. Would you be so kind?
I'd be delighted. And then we're talking about removing the ashes from the altar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Originally, anyone who wished to remove the ashes from the altar did so. Anyone.
Right. So it was just, if you wanted to do it, sure, you could have that job. However, the first question is going to come up, well, what happens if 2 people want it?
When there were many, they would run up the ramp of the altar, and he that got there first, within 4 cubits, won the privilege.
All right, so this is how you decide it.
Competitiveness among men, for very traditional.
Right, so, you know, you remember the altar was in the temple courtyard, and there was a ramp, and approximately 4 cubits away, which is nowadays about 6 feet, right? That was your finish line, because you didn't want to have them finishing at the edge of the altar. You know, the finish line had to give them time to slow down before they would like fall into the altar itself. So it's on your mark, get set. First one to the top gets to do the ashes. Right? It's the perfect idea, right? Everyone agrees? This seems a little bit too... Yeah. It does seem like an odd way, but on the other hand, having the honor is an honor. And who are you to decide who's the winner and the loser, right? Otherwise, it would always be, picking the guy that's my friend, or picking the guy who slipped me a few shekels, or that there would be other problems.
Yeah, but you can decide that each people are in charge of the different of Mincha, of Shacharit.
Right.
So you can divide this way.
You could give different jobs as a rotating basis. That wasn't the first idea.
No.
Now, look at the tiebreaker, by the way.
If two were even, the officer would say to them all, raise the finger.
Okay, so
Which finger?
no.
I'm very careful.
Apparently, this was a style of like eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
One slice, three shoot.
Right, or bubble gum in a bowl. How many? Right. What you would do is you'd put out a certain number of fingers, and then the guy who was in charge would pick a number and go 1, 2, 3, 4, and count through all the fingers. And then where he finished, that was the person who got it. Right. So this is a way of doing eeny, meeny, miny, mo in order to pick when there's a tiebreaker. So you have to imagine you put 2 fingers up, you put 1 finger up, you put 2, and I say the number is 32. And I just count from all the fingers, and wherever 32 is, boom, that's the person who actually gets the job. That way, it's impossible to cheat, except...
And how many fingers did they put out? 1 or 2? But one does not put out a thumb in the temple.
Apparently, there was an issue with cheating.
Oh.
Yeah, I can't believe it, right?
No.
And the problem was, if you put out that, right, and the Kohen Gadol was coming around and he was saying, 31, 32, and it was going to move past you, you would say, oh, no, I have, the thumb counts as a finger, right? So that means it's not 1 finger, it's 2. On the other hand, if he was going to stop, past you, you could say, oh, no, the thumb is a finger, right? So that means you have to count it. So people would get into arguments about whether a thumb was a finger or not, depending, to try and move the count.
The solutions were reason. For you say you cannot use a thumb.
That's what they said.
And if you use, you're disqualified.
Well, and that's why the Mishnah says no thumbs at the temple, right? If you want to use your thumb on the playground and get into all those arguments, which, believe me, I remember all the arguments about 1 potato, 2 potatoes very, very clearly, and all the versions of eeny, meeny, miny, mo on the playground of, is it, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, is it each word or is it each syllable that you have to, all those arguments that we would spend half an hour fighting about rather than actually getting on with the game. But it's just so wonderful that the Mishnah captures some of that we were still fighting and still willing to cheat.
But I think it's nice what it says at the bottom. This was religious zeal. You really wanted to clean the ashes from the altar, and it might lead you to unethical behavior because your zeal was so religious to do it.
Harriet, I love your segue. Because as we move on to Mishnah 2, tell me what you think of religious zeal.
Should I read the introduction?
No, just go straight on to Mishnah 2.
Section 1. It once happened that 2 were even as they ran up.
Right, tie, neck and neck.
And one of them pushed his fellow who fell and broke his leg.
Right? Well, because remember, you're running up a ramp.
Right.
So as you're running up the ramp and you see the guy and you go, boom, he falls off the ramp, breaks his leg.
And you get to remove the ashes.
And you win. Right? It's how far are you willing to go in order to get this honor for yourself? What are you willing to dishonor so that you can have the honor?
And what are we going to allow?
Yes. And go ahead.
When the court saw that they incurred danger, they decreed that they would remove the ashes from only by a count.
Right, which is the finger thing that, for doing the count.
And then there were 4 counts, and this is the first.
Right, so what they actually mean by 4 counts and first counts here means that there were different categories of jobs, and they would do counts to allocate the jobs 4 times. Now, I don't normally go into the notes, but there's a very important story that comes from the Talmud on this section, which is if you're down where it says our rabbis taught in the indent, and this shows the underlying problem that the sages were very worried about. So would you still be able to read where it says our rabbis taught?
Our rabbis taught. It once happened that 2 priests were even as they ran up the ramp, and when one of them came within 4 cubits of the altar, the other took a knife and thrust it into his heart. Oh my God.
Well, yeah, why not? Wouldn't you murder someone for, being able to do the honor?
Oh my God. No.
But how important is the honor to you?
I know what that is.
No. That's why I said it's in the notes.
No.
It's in the notes. It's in the notes. Yeah, this is from Yoma 23a. It's from the Talmud about this piece, giving another example of what sometimes happens. So you can have the packet there. You can read along. We're on Mishnah 2:2 in the middle paragraph of the explanation.
Rabbi Zadok stood on the steps of the hall and said, "Brothers of the house of Israel, listen. Behold, it says, if a body is found slain in the land, then your elders and judges shall come forth. In Deuteronomy, on whose behalf shall we bring the calf whose neck is to be broken? On behalf of the city or on behalf of the temple courts?"
All right, so Rabbi Zadok here is being ironic, because what he is saying is that we have this law in Devarim of if you find a body in the middle of nowhere and you don't know who killed it, right? They know who killed this person, right? That's clear. But what he's saying is in that case, you have to bring the cow that's going to be used as atonement from the nearest city. But here, is it really the city's fault that this happened? Or is it our fault, the temple courts, right? Us, the priests, we are the ones who are responsible for causing this. It wasn't the city's fault, it was our responsibility. But let's see how much further it can go.
All the people burst out weeping. The father of the young man who had been stabbed came and found him still in convulsions. He said, "May he be an atonement for you. My son is still having convulsions, and the knife has not become unclean." This comes to teach you that the cleanness of their vessels was of greater concern to them even than the shedding of blood.
All right, so because once the person is dead, then the knife would become ritually impure, because it would have the tumah, the ritual impurity of a corpse. But as long as he's not dead yet, I can get the knife out, and the knife is still okay. So while his son is literally bleeding to death, he's like, "Quick, save the knife!"
Oh my God! Who's worse, the father or the guy who stabbed the boy?
Well,
the guy who stabbed him, who wanted.
So as the old joke says, I'm a Kohen because my father's a Kohen.
Yeah.
So it's the entire culture of the Kohanim at this time, right? That is all off course, right? The guy who stabbed him was also a Kohen.
That's right. They're all off.
Right? It's a Kohen fighting a Kohen, and his father was a Kohen who's more worried about the knife than the fact that his son is dying.
That's right. And the other guy's more worried that he should be able to clean the ashes than that he would kill somebody.
Exactly. Right. So, this is one of the ways that the Mishnah is trying to both remind us of the corruption that happened during the late Second Temple period. Remember, we talked about that, of why they were crying and why they had to make oaths about how they follow the rules and everything, and about people dying before they got to do 2 Yom Kippur. So this was not a good time period. But the corruption was epidemic. And it wasn't just epidemic in terms of, getting money and bribes and things. The corruption was fueled, for many of them, by devotion to God, to God's service, rather than actual God's teaching, right? And this is something that comes up over and over again. We talked about a little bit during the nutshell on last Shabbat about the Mishkan, and we talked about how important the Mishkan was and everything, but that the Mishkan was a vehicle. It wasn't a purpose by itself. The Mishkan was meant to inspire us and guide us and help us. It wasn't supposed to be the purpose of our existence. The same thing is commented over and over again by the prophets. Keep your sacrifices if you're going to go murder someone. That's not what God wants. He doesn't want more sacrifices and less righteousness. He wants sacrifices and righteousness. And the Kohanim, who should have been the teachers, were missing that point. Now, there's a little bit of politics in here as well, which is the rabbis were very aware that the Kohanim should have been the teachers, and they felt that they should be the teachers, that the sages, the rabbis, should be the teachers. And by pointing out the corruption that happened in the Kohanic world, they are making their case of, look, you don't want these people in charge, right? You don't want to have the Kohanim be the ones who are calling the shots, because this is the way they get crazy, right? Remember, the Levites were known for being a little bloodthirsty, and the Kohanim are from the Levites. Well, remember, they massacred Shem, and they were the ones who helped with the golden calf, right? They were the ones who were appointed as the guardians. they've got.
Also, the Levi, the first Levi, also killed this.
That's what I said. Right. They've got some fire, and the rabbis were basically saying we need to rein in their fire and put us in charge. And what's the difference between being a Kohen and being a sage? Being a sage is a meritocracy.
Yes.
Right. You're not born a rabbi. You have to earn the title rabbi, which means we have a way to make sure that no one is in that position, at least hopefully, who is not worthy of that.
And perhaps Hashem agreed with the rabbis and therefore allowed the destruction of the temple, seeing that it was not teaching the right thing.
That's a more difficult question of exactly how did it happen. We certainly know from the first temple period that the prophets were very clear that the temple was not going to be an amulet that would be protecting the city of Jerusalem despite their corruption. But whether or not the second temple was destroyed in the same way, that is certainly a possibility, but not one that is, we can argue about it.
We'll ask when we get there.
We'll ask him when we get there, exactly. All right, Mishnah 3. Now, so that was the first round of honors. I was collecting the ashes, and we do that with our finger game. Now the second count, our next round of the finger game, we're going to have more winners, so don't worry.
So these are all jobs that the Kohanim
Well, question.
No, just a comment. Maybe we can know the answer in different amount.
With Pesach?
So these are the other jobs that the Kohanim had to do?
Exactly.
Okay. So the second count was 1, who slaughters the daily regular offering?
Right. That's not a question.
No, it's not.
These are the jobs.
He who
right. So this is everybody got their fingers out, and we're going through, and this guy gets to do this guy gets to do that, and we've got 13 jobs that we're going to hand out.
So who slaughter also take first the part of the animal?
Yeah, that's going to be one of the jobs.
One kills it, one sprinkles the blood.
Right.
Okay. Who sprinkles the blood? Who removes the ashes from the inner altar? Who removes the ashes from the candlestick? And jobs 5 through 10 was the person who takes the limbs of the offering up to the ramp.
Meaning, no, the people who take it. There's going to be one person, part 5, who takes the head, and then
the 4 limbs.
Exactly, the 4 legs, the tail and the left hind leg, the breast and the throat, the 2 flanks, the inner, the fine flour, the cakes, and the wine.
Right.
These were all separate jobs that were being allocated in this random way to make sure that everyone had an equal chance each day to participate in these honors. And
as I said before, Rabbi Akiva, in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua, the daily offering was offered up in the way it walks.
Right. So Ben Azai, based on Rabbi Akiva, said no. Actually, based on Rabbi Joshua originally, that rather than bringing it up with head and hind leg, and then 4 legs, and then tail and hind leg, you do it head, front legs, middle, back legs. Right? You take the animal as though it were walking up the ramp rather than taking these different pieces. These pieces were based off the sizes. Well, the head is given special status because that's what the Torah says, but the other parts are based off their quantity.
And you had another Kohanim cutting these appropriately?
Yes, exactly.
So start from the front.
Well, no, the right hind leg was the biggest chunk of the animal. But Ben Azai was saying you should start from the front. So that was the machloket. That was the argument.
Now, why did this part of the sentence in Rabbi Akiva presence? Because Rabbi Yeshua wasn't also with Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva teacher.
Right, which shows that Rabbi Akiva approves. If you teach something in front of the student of someone in the name of that person's teacher, and that person doesn't object or doesn't complain, then it is giving their authority to what is said, right? It's, imagine if one of my students is saying something and I don't correct them. If I don't correct them, then that means that I approve of what they said. Make sense? Okay. Mishnah 4.
The third count.
Right. So again, now we're on the third round, we might say in English, of handing out honors.
New priests come up and submit to the count for the incense.
All right. So specifically, we have a limited number of people that are available. If you're brand new, right? It's like you can imagine the priest saying, all right, anybody here who is their first day? All right, you guys are here. Oh, no, Bob, I know you came last week. No, only the new guys. Only the new guys, because the incense was such a special job and that was considered to bring such a blessing. everyone had to have a chance who hadn't done it to get it, rather than recycling the old people who had already had this blessing. So only the new people got this chance. Make sense?
But the fourth count,
The fourth round of honors.
new and old priests will take up the limbs from the ramp to the altar.
Right. So these could be, everyone could participate in that. Make sense? Okay. Yeah, this is not the most captivating of materials, but it's interesting to see how they allocated the honors.
So that nobody would be pushing the other one off the ramp.
Well, it was not uncommon for there to be raised voices in synagogues over who would get different honors at different services. You know, why does he get the third aliyah? I should be I'm the macher. I'm the guy who, you know, or arguments of his father and my father both died on the same day. Who gets the yahrzeit aliyah? Right? Okay, you both get an aliyah, but who gets the first aliyah? Right. There have been huge arguments in synagogues over the honors that people get. It's not an insignificant topic even today. So thankfully, I don't think we've had any fights in our shul in recent memory over who gets which honor.
Everybody's pretty cool about it.
We're pretty cool here. Yeah, we are not too bad. But imagine you lived in a community. Well, I mean, for example, not that we had arguments, but in Baltimore, where we had a large shul with 2 bar mitzvah families each week, there was usually one aliyah for the congregation each week, and the other aliyot were reserved for the bar mitzvah families. So now, maybe you have an ufruf, maybe you have a yahrzeit. There aren't a lot of honors left to go around. So that could definitely become more awkward of who gets priority.
The Sephardim. The Sephardim, they take one aliyah and they invite as many as need. Yeah. I've seen it in a synagogue in South Florida. I was visiting there, and they had ufruf and bar mitzvah, two things in the same day.
Right.
And that's what they did.
They just doubled the people up for the bracha?
Yeah.
And they did it at the same
No, they
time.
repeated it.
They repeat
Oh, they repeat the aliyah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can happen. And indeed, yeah, and we would do that. Remember we
But they
talked.
do the blessing on each
Yeah.
time.
Yeah,
Remember-
each time,
Right.
So the first aliyah got to be 3 times.
Right.
First aliyah.
Well, I mean, you can even do it more than that, right? Because we talked about this when we studied in Megillah, that you can, as long as the aliyah is at least 3 verses, you can cut the aliyot and have more aliyot. There are certain passages we don't cut up, but you can actually make additional aliyot. And in fact, that's what we would do in Baltimore, is we would divide up some of the aliyot to make extra ones. So that way we would have enough if we needed, you know, like an ufruf and, you know, like a baby naming. We can't just say, come back next week. We kind of have to do it. So we would just make an additional aliyah to be able to have that. But it is not always something that everyone's going to agree with, because some people are still going to be upset about which one do I get? Do I get to go before him, or am I making me go after that guy? And there's still the issue of the tirchat tzibura. It's a pain for the community to have to sit through another aliyah. And there is a certain point where you have to say, enough, right? We can't give an aliyah to everyone who wants one this week.
My dad always commented from Yom Kippur that everyone that was the big macher, they give them a aliyot Yom Kippur, were all they corrupt, they present bankruptcy, they stole money, but they give them the aliyot because they give a lot of money.
It's not uncommon. One of my professors in rabbinic school, who was a congregational rabbi for many years and then became a professor, he said one of the hardest things that he had to face was there was a very public issue with adultery among one of the machers right before Yom Kippur, and that man had been designated to read Yonah, to have the honor of reading Jonah for the Haftarah for the Mincha service. And he had to tell the man no. That because, I mean, it wasn't just, you know, a little adultery. I mean, it was a huge, very public scandal, ruining families, you know, not only his own, because it was him and a married woman. And so it was just bringing down like half the synagogue into this whole fight. And he said, I can't have you on the bima during Mincha services of Yom Kippur, especially given the Torah portion that comes right before we read Yonah, which is all about the people we're not supposed to be sleeping with, like other people's wives. He said it, but it was very, very hard because, you know, somebody's really important to the synagogue, financially, volunteer, whatever it might be. But he says you just can't, at that particular moment, you couldn't have that man stand on the bima on Yom Kippur because it would only create more pain within the congregation.
So what was the reaction to Machir?
He wasn't happy. He wasn't happy. No, he left the shul.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's an humiliation for him.
Well, so is committing adultery with someone else's wife.
No, I know about it.
I mean, so, you know, what's a congregation supposed to say? You know, you have publicly done something like this, not just, you know, secretly, and it's maybe a little bit of gossip, but this is like front page paper because the person was big in the community, not just the Jewish community. And you think we're embarrassing you, right? What are you doing to embarrass our congregation by how you're behaving? And what is going to be the feeling of the people in the room during Yom Kippur when this is happening? So, but then again, it's not surprising that somebody who would commit adultery like that wouldn't think that they were responsible for their behavior. You know, well, why should I have to pay the price for what I did? Because you did it. Why should we pay the price for what you did? So yes, it's not a fun position. But you're right. In other cases where there's a person who maybe is not the most honest person, or at least has a reputation, usually most synagogues will not ask to see their tax returns to make sure that they are 100% legit before giving them honors. And there is always a benefit of the doubt when there's room for doubt. And that was why this was, for our professor, what he was saying was one of the hardest cases, because the guy had removed all doubt about what he had been doing. So, all right, back to Yoma, Yom Kippur, Mishnah 5.
The Tamid was offered up by 9, 10, 11, or 12 priests, neither by more nor by less.
Okay, so this is wonderful Mishnah language. It wasn't offered up by 9, 10, 11, and 12 on the same day. It was offered up on 9 on certain days, by 10 on other days, by 11 on other days, and 12 on other days. And now we're going to get the breakdown of when was it 9, when was it 10, when was it 11, when was it 12. So this is the way to remember it. And now we have to look at the pieces.
The offering itself by 9.
Right. So those were the 9 that we talked about in the middle of our last Mishnah of doing the Tamid offering, the daily offering. So on a regular day, you got 9.
At the festival of Sukkot, in the hand of one, a flask of water. Now behold, there are 10.
Right. So you got 9 guys carrying pieces of the animal, and now you got another guy carrying the water for the special offering of water that we do on Sukkot. Well, did when the temple was still standing.
And then in the evening by 11, the offering itself by 9, and in the hands of 2 men were 2 logs of wood.
Right, because in the evening is when they added the additional logs of wood to the fire. So now you've got the regular 9 plus the guys bringing the additional wood for the fire. So we're up to 11.
On Shabbat by 11,
which is the same number, but for a different reason.
The offering itself by 9, in the hands of 2 men, 2 handfuls of incense for the showbread.
Right, so you would bring up this additional incense on Shabbat, again, when the temple stood. And then our maximum number?
On Shabbat, which fell during the festival of Sukkot, 1 man carried in his hand a flask of water.
Well, which is in addition to a flask, like a container. Yeah.
And what is logs?
Log.
2 logs.
Like a piece of wood.
Oh.
Like for your fireplace.
Yeah.
Throw another log on the fire. Don't you have a fireplace?
In Orlando?
We have a fireplace.
I have one.
Yeah, we use it all the time.
Oh, yeah. Especially in the summer. Yeah.
Maybe not in the summer, yeah. It's pretty. It's
I
pretty.
have a sauna in my house. A sauna. You can turn up.
This house or the house
has
up?
a sauna.
Mean your patio?
No, inside in the living room. One of the doors is a closet, and one you walk in, and it's a sauna.
In the living room?
Yeah, well, you don't realize it's on the wall. You open the door and you walk in. It is the most astonishing thing I have ever seen. And you put bricks in there.
No, I've heard of saunas in homes before.
In homes.
But I wouldn't have thought of a sauna in the living room.
That's where it is. It's right there in the living room. You don't know. If I don't tell you it, you'll just think it's one of the closet doors. But if I point it out, oh my God, there's a sauna here. It's crazy. In Florida, I have no idea why they did it.
Well, I mean, the saunas are very nice, very relaxing. They're supposed to be very healthy and therapeutic and all of that. But I wouldn't put one in my living room. No, well, you're supposed to be naked in a sauna. I mean,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you're supposed
I didn't know
You're supposed to be like walking naked to your sauna through your living room?
No, you know what? I belong to gyms where they have saunas and nobody's naked in there.
Well, it depends on the gym you belong to, but yeah, traditionally you're not wearing something in a sauna. Yeah. In a gym, yeah. But traditionally, if you have a home sauna, you're not really dressed. It's
even worse.
well, that was my point. Yeah. That was why the word living room shocked me. Right.
That's what it is.
Okay, moving on. Did it get warm in here?
Yeah.
Mishnah 6.
A ram was offered by 11, the flesh by 5, the innards, the fine flour, and the wine by 2 each.
Right, so 5 plus 3 times 2, that's 11 total.
Yeah.
So the innards, the fine flour, the wine, you had 2 guys carrying each one of those portions. Make sense? Okay.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
When it came to the wine, was it obviously it had to be kosher wine?
Oh, yeah, it was the libation. It was poured on the altar. Yeah.
Okay, so it was just poured.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mishnah 7, a bull was offered by 24.
Because bulls are bigger.
The head and the right hind leg, the head by 1, and the right hind leg by 2.
Have you ever tried to carry a full cow's back leg? They're not small.
The tail and the left hind leg, the tail by 2, and the left hind leg by 2.
Right. Tail does not mean like little tiny bit. The tail is the rump.
Oh. The breast and the neck, the breast by 1, and the neck by 3.
Because there's, the neck is this whole portion right around here. It's where the yoke rests. It's, again, not small on a cow.
The 2 forelegs by 2, the 2 flanks by 2, the innards, the fine flour, and the wine by 3 each.
Because you had commensurate offerings of each of these, so they were larger quantities.
To what does this refer? To communal offerings.
Right. This is for the offerings of the bull that are on behalf of the whole community.
But individual offerings.
That is to say, when someone shows up and says, "I'd like to sacrifice this bull, please."
If a single priest wants to offer all, he may do so.
So he would have to go back and forth.
Yeah, multi-trip. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He's not going to carry like 3,000 pounds of bull by himself.
No, probably not. But as the flaying and dismembering of both communal and individual sacrifices, the same regulations apply.
Right. Good?
Okay.
Okay. Which finishes off chapter 2. And now we're back to Yom Kippur morning. Right. So we took a little detour into how do we divide up all the jobs. But now we're back to the particular job we're talking about, which is Yom Kippur itself for the day. So now we are running the clock.
Those were offerings that were every day.
Any time of the year. Exactly. But now we're back into Yom Kippur in particular in chapter 3.
The officer said to them, "Go out and see whether the time for slaughtering the morning sacrifice has arrived." If
Keep
it
reading,
had arrived, then he who saw it said, "It is daylight." Matitya ben Shmuel says, "The whole east is light, even unto Hebron?" And he answered, "Yes."
All right, so we got to make sure that we're sacrificing this during the day, and that means it has to be light. But how light, right? Exactly when is it enough light that we are good? Because we want to do this as soon as possible. Because remember, the guy's been up all night, and he's got a busy day. So we don't really want to wait until lunchtime. We really want to start this at the earliest possible moment, but earliest possible, that's what the last opinion here is trying to say, means enough of the light being up that the light is already reaching to Hebron. It's not only reaching here in Jerusalem.
This is morning of Yom Kippur or before Yom Kippur?
Morning of Yom Kippur. Shacharit for Yom Kippur.
So they don't need to wait until lunch because there's no lunch.
It's the lunch.
No, I was confused because
No, I meant lunchtime.
12
Yes,
o'clock. You
sorry.
know, 12. Sunrise is at 7. You want to get it done earlier.
I didn't mean lunch meal. I meant lunch time. Yeah. We'll take care of that after lunch, guys.
Yeah, right. Oh, good.
Yeah. All right. And just in case you might think this is overkill, number 2.
Yeah, why was all this necessary? Because once the light of the moon rose, and they thought that the east was lit up and slaughtered the continual offering, and afterwards they had to take it out to the place of burning.
All right. So they began the slaughter, and then someone went, Wait a minute, Frank, it's not dawn yet. That's the moon, right? It's just enough light from the moon that made the guy think that it was bright like dawn. Yeah, I know. It doesn't seem like that for us. But remember, in a no electric light world, the moon is actually very, very bright. If you've ever been outside when it's full moon or near full moon in a place where there are no lights, it's like having a flashlight. You can see all around you by the light of the moon. And if you were near dawn and you had the moon shining down on you, you could easily make a mistake, which is why they are saying, double check that it's really daylight. Because if you started slaughtering it and it's not time yet, then it's wasted. And it has to be burnt in a place where the mistaken sacrifices are burnt. Because you can't just like save it for lunch. You have to burn it up because it was dedicated for the use, but it can't go on the altar because it's the wrong time. Okay.
They led the high priest down to the place of immersion.
Right, now we're continuing again with the timeline for the high priest.
This was the rule in the temple. Whoever covers his feet requires an immersion, and whoever passed water required sanctification by washing his hands and feet.
Okay. Euphemism.
Yes, for sure. The second
So,
one is.
passing water, do people understand what that means?
Yes.
So exactly, in preschool language, that's doing number one,
Okay.
right? Passing water is doing number one. And if you've ever passed water in a place that is not equipped with a nice toilet, you may know that when the water hits the ground, it splashes, right? It's not neatly contained. So washing your hands, washing your feet makes sense because your feet have probably gotten dribbled. I know it's not exactly a pretty image, but welcome to no indoor plumbing. All right. Cover your feet is the idiom for number two, right? So that's kaki. So if you actually do number two and you are going to go and do something at the temple, you have to do a full immersion, right? You don't get to just wash your hands and feet.
It was the water around.
Yeah, they had mikvaot at the temple, on the temple grounds. So, yes, you had to be properly immersed before this, and that includes for bodily functions. Now, this doesn't mean that you had to do these things every time it happened if you were just, Joe Schmo farmer. But if you were a priest and you were officiating the temple, then this was the requirement before you could continue to officiate.
When I was a little girl, I used to call them segregated swimming pools because men had to go separately and women separately. So, Mommy, are you going to the segregated swimming pool now? And that's now I see.
Right.
Wow, but that must have been something to create one of those back in those days. And it has to be filled with rainwater, with fresh water or something like that.
Mayim Chaim, it's literally living water. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Well, probably just a minute. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'll explain in a minute, I think. We'll see how fast we get through a few more Mishnayot. But let's do Mishnah 3.
First part, a man may not enter the temple courtyard or to worship, even if he was clean, until he immerses himself.
Right. And this is one of the things that we have found historically, archaeologically. That near the temple grounds in Jerusalem, you can go even today to the archaeological areas, and there are many mikvaot. There are many places that people would have been able to immerse themselves before going up to the Temple Mount. And it doesn't matter, I try to remind people this all the time, right? The ritual immersion is nothing like a bath, right? This is not about getting yourself clean. This is about tumah, about ritual impurity being removed through the process of ritual immersion. So it doesn't matter how, doctor, sanitary, squeaky clean you are, you've still got to go through a mikveh before you go up to the temple.
Oh, but I thought this was kind of nice because if you were already ritually pure, you didn't separate the things. Oh, you're ritually impure, you go in the mikveh. No, you're okay. You could just go up there. Everybody goes in the mikveh.
Everybody goes in the mikveh.
You don't separate out. Yeah. You don't say you're better. That's
yeah.
Make it even.
Go ahead, part 2.
5 immersions and 10 sanctifications did the high priest perform on that day. For himself?
Well, for the whole service. The service was complicated. Yeah, yeah. He's dunking a lot.
Yeah, and all in sanctity in the Beit HaPava, with the exception of this one alone.
All right. So the Beit HaPava is the place where they had the mikveh in the temple courtyard, but there had to be another one outside the temple courtyard before you went in, right? So he did one first,
Wow.
and then he did all the other ones in the temple courtyard. Because otherwise, how did he enter, right?
So how did you do the sanctifications? What do you mean by 10 sanctifications?
It means the different parts of the service.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a busy day for him, which we're going to find out in just a few minutes. And
Wow.
it was also a
And
very
he was half asleep too.
it was also a very public day. Remember what we said at the very end of chapter 1? Everybody was already there at the break of day to witness the Yom Kippur ceremony. You know, imagine the poor pressure of being the high priest.
Wow.
But he immersed naked?
Yes. Yeah, but wait,
Chapter Mishnah 4.
yeah. But it wasn't in his living room. Okay.
Because if everyone was there already. then-
Mishnah 4.
They spread out a linen sheet between him
Ah,
and the people.
Right? So
he
yeah,
was behind the curtain.
he is in front of the people, but they hang a curtain between him and the people while he does the immersion.
He stripped off his clothes, went down, immersed himself, came up and dried himself. They brought him the golden garments. He put them on, sanctified his hands and feet, and they brought him the tamid.
Right? That was the lamb that was being brought for the daily offering.
He made the required cut, and someone else finished it for him.
Right. So he actually does shlita. He does the slaughter, right? But he doesn't finish
Oh,
dismembering the animal, pulling out the guts and all of those
then
things.
he'd be a mess.
Well, not just be a mess, but also time, right? It would take him a long time to do that before he could get to the next piece. So he does the slaughter, the animal is
She
dead,
must have gone.
and he's got other job, so someone else gets to finish up that slaughter.
I'm not sure I want the temple restored. I'm going to have to watch this kind of stuff.
You're not obligated to be there, right? It wasn't. People did not have to make a pilgrimage for this. This was not part of the Shlosh Regalim. So you could come, and the people of Jerusalem clearly were very interested to make sure that the ritual happened and to make sure the ritual happened correctly. But you would not be required to be there.
What happens if someone see a Kohen Gadol doing a mistake in the ritual?
We don't have any specific records of that. We do have the great record of one of the kings of Israel doing something wrong during Sukkot, and he got pelted by the etrogs.
Oh.
Everybody threw the etrogs at him.
Oh,
They like you know in old movies in America, they show pictures of people throwing tomatoes. Yeah, tomatoes are soft. Etrogim aren't soft. Yeah. So yeah,
Because
the crowd was
everything.
the crowd wasn't always friendly.
Ooh.
Yeah, so every now and then we think, oh, it must be nice to be Kohen Gadol. Yeah, I'm not sure I want the job.
Yeah, no, we're watching
Not
that.
after
Yeah.
seeing all
And then he
this.
received the blood and sprinkled it after somebody else finished the job.
Exactly.
Received the blood. He went inside to smoke the morning incense.
That doesn't sound as bad as, I mean, that's not as bad as it sounds, right? He's not inside smoking the morning incense. It means he goes inside to turn the morning incense into smoke, right? You take the solid incense, you put it on the hot coals, and that causes it to turn into the cloud of incense, right? He wasn't smoking the incense,
And he trims the lamps.
right? These are the wicks on the menorah.
And then he offers up the head and the limbs and the griddle cakes and the
Mhm.
wine.
And references for all of these different pieces you can find in your notes, the footnotes of where in Leviticus it talks about these different,
So that would be the grain.
Wow.
Griddle cakes would be the
these
grain.
different
That's a
steps.
lot of work.
It is a lot of
What
work.
are griddle will?
Grain.
They were the grain that was cooked into these like special cakes.
Oh,
The wheat,
That's-
you had a wheat too, the brown-
Think like kind of like a pancake,
yeah.
Yeah.
but not sweet.
Okay.
So no one is near him when he's doing all this in order to, if he makes a mistake, go and try to repair it.
Well, I mean, the people are there. Remember, that's why they did the whole training thing in the previous weeks in order to make sure that he would be ready to do this. So as long as he's in this part of the temple, there are other Kohanim there, and if he needs help, he can say, "What do I do again?" It's like cut its neck. But as far as someone else being able to do it for him,
Wow.
the actual actions he has to do. Right? That's his job. That's what he wanted it.
But if you let people stop him every 10 minutes to criticize what he's doing, you'll never finish. Next year, he'll still be doing it, so,
I like the way the last guy flicked the blood. It was much better.
yeah, right.
How long did it last? The whole day?
Let's keep reading and you'll get a better feel for all of things. As we have only just touched the beginning of his job.
Wow.
for that day.
Okay, so where are we now? We on Mishnah 3?
Mishnah 5.
Mishnah 5. I turned it wrong. Mishnah 4. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
The morning incense was offered up between the blood and the limbs.
Right. So this is the normal, right? And this is offered up between them. It means in the timeline, right? You sprinkle the blood, you do the morning incense, then you do the limbs on the altar, right? So that's the timeline that these things are happening.
The dusk incense was offered between the limbs and the drink offerings.
Right? So you would do the limbs, you would do the incense, and then you would do the libations.
If the high priest was either old or of delicate health, warm water, they would heat some water for him and pour it into the cold water to temper its coldness.
Okay, so remember I told you that we were going to talk a little bit about the mikveh, right? So that's a lot of dunking, 5 times in one day is a lot of going to the mikveh. And
wasn't it hot in Israel at that time? The temperature is pretty hot because you're talking about September, August.
overall, it's September, October for Yom Kippur because we're at the end.
Yeah.
But in a stone cistern, a stone like well, at the break of day, and certainly before midday,
Right.
and you're old, these old bones don't like going into just air temperature water, right? When water is the temperature of the air, it actually feels colder than the air because it sucks out the heat from your body much, much faster. That's why it's nice when it's hot outside to go into water, even if the water is the same temperature. So what's happening here is they're heating up extra water, and then before he goes into the mikveh, they are adding the heat. So that way he can have a nicer mikveh, and it will be a little bit more bearable for him rather than going in.
But this sort of says they heat up iron rods before Yom Kippur.
Right.
So they can put the hot rods into water because you can't boil water on Yom Kippur.
Exactly
You
right.
light a fire to boil water.
You can and you can't. Actually, as we talked about a little bit earlier today, the activities for the temple were permitted even if we wouldn't normally do them in our house, right? Like slaughtering an animal, you can't do that on Shabbat or Yom Kippur at home, but you can absolutely do it at the temple. And the same thing with the fires and other things. For those of you who weren't here at lunchtime, you can check out the YouTube. We talked about that a little bit.
There's not a contradiction. Like, how can you allow the place where supposedly God live doing things that he said not do it on that day? It's like going against
that exact question came up today. That exact question came up today. Isn't this a bit like do as I say, not as I do? Right. And one of the basic answers is it's because this was a requirement to do these other things. It wasn't that God was getting away with something. It was God also demanded that we do these sacrifices. Therefore, in order to fulfill that commandment, we did. In order to fulfill the commandment of Shabbat in our home for ourselves, we don't, because there's no commandment to light a fire for me. So it's more complicated. Watch the YouTube.
But it also shows that the temple is set aside. It's not the same as our home. These rules are different in there, so that it's a separate holy place.
There you go. That's
Not the same.
the handout from today.
Yeah.
Can I have one too, please?
Yep. If you want to pass a couple of that, yeah. All right. So this comes back to the question of a mikveh. Once a mikveh has been made a kosher mikveh, you can add additional water to it from any source, and it is still kosher. Right? That's why it's called living waters. Right? You cannot defile a mikveh once the mikveh has been made correctly in the beginning.
And what happens if the Kohen Gadol do pee in it?
So
But it's impure.
the ocean is a mikveh.
That's
Do you know what fish do in the ocean?
Doesn't
Right.
matter what your kids do when you bring them into the ocean.
We don't need to go there.
No.
But
Right.
So a mikveh, which is the ocean, a lake, a river,
Yes.
right, or a mikveh that's actually part of a synagogue or a community center, cannot be made impure by what is put into it. Because if it could, then the first moment a person who was ritually impure walked into the mikveh would no longer be a mikveh.
Yes.
So that's why I asked you. There's no way. Also, if someone killed someone else inside the water, you cannot make
God forbid. No, it doesn't render the mikveh invalid. Now, you wouldn't have to, if someone drained the mikveh below the minimum level and then filled it with the wrong water, then the mikveh would no longer be kosher. But as long as the mikveh maintains the right measure and it began with the right type of water, living water, then you're okay. That's a very normal practice. And what's happening here of adding extra warm water, the mikveh is still perfectly kosher. Or taking heated iron rods and adding them to the water like immersion elements, that's the mikveh still perfectly kosher. Yeah, the laws of mikvah are a little confusing, but they actually have very deep logical explanations. If the mikvah wasn't permanently kosher, then no mikvah could do its job. It has to be untaintable in a ritual sense. All right, I think we can finish Mishnah 6.
The high priest.
Mm-hmm.
They brought the high priest to the Beit HaParah,
Right, remember, which is where the mikvah was on the temple grounds,
which was on holy ground. They spread a sheet of linen between him and the people. He sanctified his hands and his feet and stripped. Rabbi Meir said he stripped and then sanctified his hands and feet. He went down and immersed himself, came up and dried himself. Afterwards, they brought him white garments. He put them on and sanctified his hands and feet.
Okay, so there's a lot here.
Yeah, this is big.
Right, so now he is getting ready. So what he just did was the daily offering, but now he is getting ready for the Yom Kippur offering.
Right.
Because we do the tamid, we do the daily offering. Exactly right, which is why he's changing from his regular high priest clothes into high priest on Yom Kippur clothes, which are the simple white garments. This is why, to bring it back into our modern day, well, for the last couple thousand years, when we do our davening, our Amidah is always linked to the sacrifices of the day, right? So we have a shacharit, which matches the tamid offering, the morning offering that was brought every day, and we have a mincha offering, which was tied to the afternoon offering. But on Shabbat, or on Yom Kippur, or on any other holiday, there was an additional offering that was brought, the musaf, which is why we have a musaf Amidah, which technically could be done at any point during the day. We like to do it always right after the sermon. That way we can have still a minyan to do that Amidah. But technically, if you were on your own, you could do shacharit, have lunch, and then do musaf. Imagine how much fun that would be. We do Kiddush luncheon, and then I have to try and convince everyone to get back in the sanctuary yeah. But I want to convince everybody. I mean, if I can make them have the opportunity for musaf before going to lunch, then we sneak that in.
Rabbi, why did he need to wash his hands and feet if he came back from immersing himself in the mikvah like a few minutes before?
Because he is walking and he is changing, right? So with both, it's the question of what are your hands touching during all of this process? What are your feet touching during all of this process? So it was an extra level of precaution to make sure. I mean, Yom Kippur is the single most important ritual moment. How many times did I say moment? It is the single most important ritual activity that happens in the Jewish calendar in the entire year. It is just so important that it has to be done exactly right. That's why they do the whole training the Kohen Gadol stuff. It's why they are so careful to keep him awake lest he have an issue during the night. It is really working very, very hard to make sure that it is perfect. So we shouldn't be surprised at the extra levels that they are going to. Remember, the first Mishnah we read for Yoma was somebody saying, maybe we should give him a backup wife, just in case the first wife dies. Right. So even though we said no to that, and even though we said, in Canaan of ourself, if you do that, there's no end to it, that doesn't mean we're not going to see layers and layers and layers of protection throughout the Yom Kippur service. There is an end, there is a limit, and it may seem like it's more protective than we might be. But if you really believe that Yom Kippur was the one day, the one opportunity to get it right between us and God, to finalize all of the tshuva, the repentance for the whole nation between us and God, don't you want to get it right? Right? You can't go crazy. That's, this whole tension that we've got, but you got to take it seriously and do it right, which is kind of a good metaphor for Judaism as a whole.
And what can I take away from this for today within the immersing and washing? What does that mean for me today?
The same question, right? There's a balance, right? There's always a tension in Judaism between doing something crazy strict, that you are so careful that you end up like not doing what you need to do because you're too much busy doing the protection stuff. and not being careful enough. You don't take it seriously enough, and you don't actually follow through. And this is trying to say, yes, you've got to do it careful, right? When you go to have the bread, you do your challah, you have to do netilat yadayim. You got to wash your hands, right? It doesn't matter. Don't tell me your hands are clean. I know your hands are clean. Go ahead and do it. And when you do it, don't just wash each hand a couple times, right? That is a level of protection. And that is actually a specific metaphor, not for Yom Kippur, but for the temple, with the idea being that our table has become like the Mizbeach, has become like the altar. And therefore we have brought over some of the activities of the temple to our table. And we've brought some of those stringencies, and we've also brought that tension of, I'm not going to sit there washing my hand 18 times. Right? That there is going to be a limit. Is that good?
Yes.
Okay. And that's where we're going to leave it for tonight. All right.